The Mojave wind was practically screaming outside, carrying the faint, arrogant laughter of Tier 1 operators. Everyone in that room was convinced I was just some public relations stunt, a fragile punchline waiting to crack under the brutal kick of a heavy-caliber rifle. But by the time the dust finally settled in the canyon, their comms were dead silent, and a lone female sniper had systematically wiped out every single legend on the board. The briefing room at the High Desert Special Warfare Training Center reeked of burnt coffee, CLP solvent, and raw, unfiltered ego. It was 4 a.m., and the air conditioning had kicked the bucket days ago, turning that corrugated metal box into an oven baking in the leftover desert heat. I sat quietly in the back row, taking my time as I meticulously scrubbed the bolt of my rifle. Out of everyone breathing that stale air, I was the only woman. Earning the right to sit there meant I hadn't just survived the meat grinder of BUD/S, but I'd also been selected for the Advanced Sniper Qualification Course, a sacred brotherhood usually reserved for the hardest men the Navy had to offer. Up front, Master Chief Marcus Vance was holding court. The man was a walking myth, built like a tank, sporting a thick, unruly beard and a chest stacked with classified ribbons earned everywhere from Fallujah to Kandahar. He was the head instructor for the integration exercise, a grueling war game meant to throw the green sniper candidates up against a seasoned red cell of active DevGru shooters. "Listen up, candidates," Vance barked, his voice sounding like boots grinding on gravel. "Tomorrow's evolution is strictly force on force. We're dropping you into a 12-square-mile grid out in Black Canyon. Your job is to hit the extraction point and establish overwatch. Our job is to hunt you down, rip off your tags, and prove you don't have what it takes to operate at this level. You take one simulated hit, you're done. You get spotted, you're done. If you start crying, you're definitely done." A wave of chuckles rolled through the room. Almost immediately, a few guys turned their heads to glance at me sitting in the back. I didn't give them the satisfaction of looking up. I just pushed another patch through my bore and kept working. Standing right beside Vance was Petty Officer Jack Rollins, the reigning heavyweight champion of their sniper cell. Rollins was cocky, painfully good-looking, and possessed a terrifying record-breaking accuracy for long-range engagements within his squadron. He crossed his arms and leaned back against the whiteboard. "Any questions?" Vance asked, staring a hole right through me. "Hayes, you absolutely sure you want to drag that giant piece of iron out there? That's a whole lot of hiking for a lightweight." The room burst into full-blown laughter. I gently set my bolt down on the table. I wasn't running the standard-issue lightweight Scar H, nor was I packing the sleek new Mark 22 advanced sniper rifle. Instead, I'd pulled an absolute dinosaur from the armory. It was a beat-up, heavy-as-sin Mark 13 Mod 7, chambered in .300 Win Mag, complete with a massive suppressor on the muzzle. Sure, it was an absolute beast to hump across miles of broken terrain, but it had a very specific, reliable harmonic resonance that I knew like the back of my hand. "I'll manage just fine, Master Chief," I replied softly, though my steady voice sliced right through the laughter in the room. "The extra weight keeps my feet on the ground." Rollins let out a loud snort. "Sure thing. Look, when your legs give out at mile 3, just pop a flare. I'll personally make sure the medevac bird brings you a cold juice box." I didn't flinch. Being underestimated was practically a daily routine for my entire military career. Growing up hunting elk in the freezing backcountry of Montana taught me a very simple truth. The mountain doesn't give a damn about your gender, your pride, or your reputation. It only rewards the prepared. These guys looked at me and saw a girl trespassing in their elite clubhouse. I looked at them and saw nothing but targets. On paper, the objective sounded straightforward, but the reality was borderline suicidal. Black Canyon was a brutal nightmare of razor-sharp shale rock, dry riverbeds, and nasty mesquite thorns. The insane heat off the ground created massive optical mirages, while the steep canyon walls whipped up unpredictable swirling winds. We had to push up to the high ground, dig in, and take out designated high-value targets while dodging Rollins and his 6-man squad of seasoned SEALs. Before the sun even thought about rising, we started loading into the back of the transport trucks. Rollins strolled past my vehicle and slapped his hand hard against the tailgate. "Hey, Hayes, just a friendly heads up," he said with a smirk. "My boys aren't pulling any punches today. We're going to run you into the dirt. Try not to take it personally when we yank your tag in the first hour." I stared right back at him, my face completely masked in green and brown cami paint. "I really hope you don't hold back, Rollins," I told him, keeping my eyes deadlocked on his. "That would completely ruin the lesson." Rollins just sneered and shook his head as he walked off. "She's totally delusional," I heard him whisper to his spotter. They all snickered when I finally hauled the massive Mark 13 onto my back, stumbling for just a fraction of a second under the 60 pounds of water, ammo, and gear. They honestly thought they were watching a slow-motion failure. They had no earthly idea they were actually looking at a ghost. By 10 in the morning, the Mojave sun was beating down like a physical hammer. The mercury was already sitting at 104 degrees, and the rocky canyon floor was throwing heat back up like an open oven door. The exercise had shifted into high gear, and honestly, it was an absolute slaughter. In barely 3 hours, Vance and Rollins's hunter team had completely dismantled every single one of my peers. They utilized surveillance drones, aggressive flanking routes, and their deep familiarity with the terrain to force everyone out of their hiding spots. Over the encrypted radio, I listened as the defeat codes rolled in one by one. Seasoned operators were getting outflanked and smoked by the veteran cell. "That makes 5. Rollins's voice buzzed over the red cell's tactical net. He was belly down on a ridgeline, sweeping the valley floor with a heavy spotting scope. "There's only one left out there. The girl," Vance replied from the air-conditioned command center. "Don't get sloppy, Rollins. Track her down, box her in, and finish this." "Solid copy. Pushing to grid Alpha 6. She's got to be making a play for the high ground at Demon's Ridge to get a line of sight on the exfil point. It's strictly by the book." Rollins wasn't wrong to assume that. Every piece of sniper doctrine ever written dictated that I needed elevation. High ground gives you the widest field of view and lets you completely dictate the engagement. Rollins and his 5 shooters fanned out in a wide horseshoe, meticulously clearing every ridge and draw leading toward Demon's Ridge. They moved like a pack of wolves, silent, fluid, and lethal. They were visually scanning for anything out of place, an unnatural shadow, the flash of a glass lens, or the crack of a dry branch. But the 4th hour ticked by, then the 5th. Absolutely nothing. The ambient heat was creeping into the danger zone. The wind started howling through the canyon, whipping up blinding dust devils that trashed anyone's visibility. Frustration began to boil over as Rollins aggressively wiped the sweat out of his eyes. "Where in the hell is she?" he muttered. "There's no way she humped it up the spine without us spotting her." Back in the command center, Master Chief Vance was glued to the GPS tracking feeds. Every candidate was issued a safety tracker, but a fun little loophole in the rules allowed us to detach them and leave them at the insertion point if we wanted to risk running completely blind. My little digital dot was sitting dead still, exactly where I had stepped off the truck. I had gone completely off the grid. Out in the blistering canyon, Rollins signaled his boys to shrink their perimeter. "She's dragging that massive Mark 13 around. She's got to be totally smoked and hiding under a bush somewhere. Start sweeping the ravines." What Rollins failed to realize was that I never went for the high ground. While every other candidate burned their lungs sprinting for elevation, blindly trusting the strict doctrine they'd been spoon-fed, I did the exact opposite. I knew the veteran Red Cell would be looking for textbook tactics. So, I threw the textbook out the window. Rather than climbing, I buried myself. Long before the sun even peeked over the horizon, I had low-crawled into the deepest, lowest, most god-awful crack in the entire canyon. It was a bone-dry, snake-infested drainage ditch they called the Anvil. Tactically speaking, it was completely useless for long-range observation, but it was also the exact, unavoidable choke point the hunters would have to pass through to reach their extraction zone once they figured they'd wiped us out. I wasn't out there hunting the designated objective. I was hunting the men hunting me. I lay flat in the dirt, completely swallowed up by a custom-made ghillie suit I had painstakingly woven from local sagebrush and jute. I focused entirely on my breathing, keeping my heart rate locked at a calm 55 beats per minute. The massive Mark 13 rested perfectly on its bipod, wrapped tight in camouflage burlap. I hadn't moved a single muscle in 6 hours. Tiny red ants marched across my knuckles, and I didn't flinch. A scorpion scurried right over the toe of my boot, and I didn't even blink. I just stared through the glass of my optic. The heat mirage was incredibly thick, making the distant boulders look like they were wobbling underwater. I glanced at my kestrel meter. The wind was blowing from the left at about 8 miles per hour, with occasional 12-mile-per-hour gusts. Out of nowhere, a shadow drifted across a ridge about 800 yards out. It was the point man for the hunter team. 2 more operators were trailing closely behind him. They were coming down from the high ground with their rifles lowered, clearly annoyed and operating under the assumption that I had either passed out from the heat or just walked off the course. I reached up and slowly dialed my turrets. Click, click, click. I factored in the wind. I dialed for the barometric pressure. I made the minute adjustment for the spin drift of that massive .300 Win Mag round. I let the air slowly bleed out of my lungs until they were empty. The crosshairs floated perfectly over the dead center of the point man's chest plate. Crack. The suppressed weapon sounded like a heavy whip snapping across the canyon walls. In a split second, the Miles laser detection gear strapped to the point man's rig let out a deafening, high-pitched squeal, confirming a fatal hit. He froze in his tracks, utterly shocked, staring down at his chest in disbelief. "Contact! Sniper!" Rollins roared over the radio, instantly throwing his body behind a massive boulder. "Where the hell did that come from? Lay down suppressive fire!" The rest of the Red Cell guys scrambled for cover, firing blindly up at the high ridges because they naturally assumed the shot came from above. The canyon echoed with the chaotic roar of automatic blank fire. I didn't let the noise rattle me. I smoothly ran the bolt and chambered another round. The brilliant thing about taking the low ground was the acoustics. The canyon walls bounced the sound of my suppressed rifle in every direction, making it physically impossible for them to track my signature. I swung my glass over to the second operator, who was frantically checking the eastern ridgeline. He was careless, exposing roughly 2 inches of his shoulder and the side of his helmet. Crack! The second vest shrieked into the desert air. "I'm hit! I'm dead!" the guy shouted. Genuine panic started to infect the SEAL team. 2 of their best guys had been dropped in under 30 seconds, and they hadn't seen so much as a flash. "Pop smoke! Smoke!" Rollins yelled at the top of his lungs. Huge, billowing clouds of thick white smoke exploded across the canyon floor, completely obscuring their position. A grim little smile crossed Rollins's face. He was an expert at evasion, and that smoke was his ticket to fall back and regroup. But I had already anticipated that move. I understood the canyon's wind currents intimately because I'd been watching the dust devils dance across the floor all morning. The breeze was funneling directly down the dry wash. That thick smoke wasn't going to rise at all. It was going to drift perfectly to the left, blinding the SEALs while leaving their right flank completely wide open. I smoothly panned the heavy rifle, tracking exactly to the right edge of the expanding white cloud. 10 seconds later, a third operator tumbled out of the fog, attempting to bound toward a fresh piece of cover. He was sprinting hard, making him an incredibly tough target at 750 yards. I didn't second-guess the math. I led his movement by exactly half a mil dot. Crack. A third alarm shrieked. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the command center. Master Chief Vance grabbed the edge of the control console, his knuckles turning stark white. He was watching the impossible unfold on his digital screens. The undisputed kings of the mountain were getting systematically dismantled by a ghost. "Rollins!" Vance barked into the microphone. "What is your status? Talk to me." Down in the dirt, Jack Rollins had his face pressed hard into the gravel. His heart was threatening to hammer its way out of his chest. Every ounce of his cocky arrogance had vanished. replaced by the raw primal terror of being the prey. 3 of his men were dead in the dirt. He only had 2 left, and he still didn't have a clue where I was hiding. The radio hissed with static before Rollins finally answered. His voice was shaking with a toxic blend of fury and pure disbelief. "She isn't on the mountain, Master Chief," Rollins whispered into the mic. "She's down in the dirt with us." Black Canyon had ceased to be a hunting ground. It was now a graveyard. Deep inside the baking oven of the anvil, Rollins smashed his cheek against the sharp shale, gasping for air. 10 yards to his left lay Brody Mitchell. Mitchell was a heavy breacher by trade, the kind of guy who used a shotgun to kick down doors in Ramadi. But pinned down out here by an invisible shooter, he looked completely terrified. Over on Rollins' right was Tyler Brooks, the team's backup sniper. Brooks's eyes were wide and bloodshot as he desperately scanned the rippling heat mirages on the horizon. "Where is she, Rollins?" Brooks hissed over their encrypted short-range comms, his voice audibly cracking. "We've been glassing the ridgeline for 20 minutes. She had to have displaced. Nobody sits in the same hide after dropping 3 targets." Rollins ground his teeth together as sweat stung his eyes. "That's because she isn't on the damn ridge, Brooks. She's below us. She's shooting upward and letting the canyon bounce the acoustics. We're staring in the exact wrong direction." "Below us? That's suicide. There's no exfil route out of that wash." "She isn't trying to exfil," Rollins growled, the sickening realization hitting him like a physical blow. "She's trying to exterminate us." Up in the command center, Master Chief Vance was practically pacing a trench into the floorboards. His monitors, which usually showcased the aggressive, hyper-violent blitzes of his elite operators, were completely static. His guys were paralyzed. This was a Tier 1 unit. Lethal men who hunted high-value targets across the globe, currently being held hostage by a single female candidate, laying low in the mud. "Rollins, you need to break contact immediately," Vance ordered over the radio. "You're sitting in a fatal funnel. Fall back to Grid Charlie 2 and regroup." "Negative, Master Chief," Rollins shot back, his pride completely overriding his tactical judgment. "If we stand up to run, she'll pick us off. We have to flush her out. Brooks, Mitchell, listen to me. On my mark, we're executing a bounding overwatch straight toward the dry creek bed. I'll lay down suppressive fire. Mitchell, you move first. Brooks, you're on his 6. We push hard into the brush and close the distance." "Copy," Mitchell whispered, tucking his legs underneath him like a coiled spring. 600 yards away, buried under a crust of Mojave dirt and woven sagebrush, I didn't just hear the faint crunch of shifting gravel. I felt it vibrate right through the earth. My body was absolutely screaming at me. I hadn't moved an inch in almost 8 hours. The lactic acid was chewing through my calves, and my throat felt like it was coated in crushed glass. Inside my ghillie suit, the temperature was hovering around 115 degrees, but my mind was utterly detached from the physical agony. I was operating like a machine, running the calculations and reading the environment. I watched the heat waves boiling off the rocks. The wind had dropped down to a steady 4 miles per hour straight out of the east. I smoothly rolled the parallax dial on my Night Force optic, snapping the rocky outcropping where Rollins was pinned into razor-sharp focus. I caught a glimpse of his M4 barrel creeping around the edge of a boulder. He was prepping to blind fire and cover a movement. They're going to make a break for the creek bed, I thought to myself. It's the only micro-terrain out there that offers any real cover. I bumped the heavy Mark 13 a fraction of an inch to the left, pre-aiming at the exact gap between their boulders and the lip of the ditch. I wasn't going to try and track a moving target. I was going to let the target run right into my crosshairs. I dialed my elevation turret down. The distance was exactly 580 yards. "Go!" Rollins roared, pulling his trigger. The canyon echoed with the deafening chatter of his rifle, spitting blank brass into the dirt. Mitchell exploded out from behind his cover, a frantic blur of desert camouflage sprinting in a low crouch toward the trench. He was moving with the terrifying, explosive speed of a seasoned operator. He had exactly 3 seconds of open ground to survive. 1, I counted in my head. Mitchell hit the halfway mark, his legs pumping furiously. 2. He reached the edge of the ditch, throwing his weight forward to dive into safety. I exhaled completely. The crosshairs floated perfectly into the empty space just ahead of Mitchell's chest. Crack. The massive .300 Winchester Magnum blank sent a concussive shock wave through the dust. The Miles sensors on Mitchell's chest and back erupted in a shrill, piercing alarm, just as his boots left the ground. He crashed hard into the creek bed, dead on arrival. "Mitchell is down," Brooks screamed, his panic finally shattering his strict discipline. He had been covering Mitchell, but the invisible precision of that shot completely broke his nerve. Without waiting for Rollins to give the command, Brooks scrambled backward, abandoning his cover to make a wild, desperate dash for a thicker cluster of mesquite bushes. "Brooks, hold your position!" Rollins screamed. It was way too late. Brooks was caught dead in the open, running erratically as he tried to zigzag. My hands worked the rifle with fluid, mechanical precision. I ripped the heavy bolt back, ejected the spent brass, and slammed a fresh round into the chamber. I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink. I kept both eyes open to maintain my peripheral vision, tracking his frantic movement. I locked onto his cadence. Left foot, right foot, left foot. Crack. Brooks stumbled forward as his vest shrieked the death knell. He dropped to his knees, ripping his helmet off and throwing it into the dirt, out of sheer, unbelievable frustration. "Son of a..." Brooks cursed, the canyon walls swallowing up his anger. Silence fell over the Mojave once more. The wind picked up, whistling softly through the scrub brush. Down in the anvil, Jack Rollins was entirely alone. The undisputed champion of the red cell, the same man who had laughed at the weight of my rifle, was now the last man standing. His chest heaved as he pressed himself into the dirt. 5 of his best operatives were dead, and he was completely trapped. The sun began its slow descent behind the jagged peaks of Black Canyon, casting long, menacing shadows across the valley floor. The drop in temperature brought a dangerous shift in atmospheric conditions. The heat mirage faded, but the canyon winds became completely erratic, swirling in unpredictable vortexes that made long-range ballistics an absolute nightmare. In the command center, Master Chief Vance stared at the screen, his arms crossed tight. Nobody in that room was laughing anymore. The silence was absolute. "She broke them," a junior instructor whispered in disbelief. Vance didn't respond. He just watched the blinking dot that represented Jack Rollins. Out in the dirt, Rollins knew he had exactly 1 play left. He couldn't outshoot what he couldn't see, and he couldn't wait around for nightfall. Once the sun went down, my heavy thermal optics would make him glow like a beacon. He had to draw me out. He had to bait the ghost. Rollins unclipped his chin strap and slowly, deliberately placed his helmet on the muzzle of his rifle. It was the oldest trick in the sniper handbook, the dummy head. He planned to inch it up over the rock, drawing my fire. The second I shot, he would pinpoint my muzzle flash or the dust signature from my heavy rifle, and he would snap fire back. It was a gamble built on milliseconds, a pure test of reflex. A mile away, I watched the shadows lengthen. My vision was blurring at the edges from severe dehydration, but my focus remained absolute. Through the scope, I watched the top of Rollins's boulder. Slowly, agonizingly, the rounded top of a camouflage helmet began to creep above the stone. My finger rested gently on the 2-pound trigger. The crosshairs were centered perfectly on the Kevlar. It was an easy shot. Way too easy. A Tier 1 operator doesn't peek over a rock like a frightened recruit, I thought to myself. My eyes darted away from the helmet, scanning the deep shadows pooled at the base of the boulder, looking for the anomaly. There it was. Just 2 feet to the right of his rock, tucked beneath a fallen mesquite log, I caught the absolute faintest reflection of ambient light. It wasn't a glass lens. Rollins was way too smart to expose his optic to the sky. It was the polished curve of a rifle barrel, shifting ever so slightly in the dark. He was waiting for me to shoot the dummy. I smiled, a slow, cracked expression hiding beneath my camouflage paint. I completely ignored the helmet and aimed directly at the shadow beneath the log. But there was a major problem. The angle was totally obstructed. A thick, dead stump of ironwood stood directly between my line of sight and Rollins's hiding spot. A standard 5.56 millimeters or even a 7.62 millimeters round would deflect immediately off that dense, petrified wood, sending the shot tumbling off course. That was exactly why I brought the heavy iron. The Mark 13. Mod 7 fired a 220-grain .300 Winchester Magnum projectile. It was a flying sledgehammer designed specifically to punch right through engine blocks, brick walls, and heavy brush without ever deviating from its flight path. I checked my windage one last time. I dialed 3 clicks of elevation. I settled the crosshairs directly onto the thickest part of that ironwood stump, trusting the math, trusting the weapon, and trusting myself. "Checkmate," I whispered. I squeezed the trigger. Crack. The rifle bucked violently against my shoulder. The massive bullet tore across the canyon, ripping through the air at 2,900 feet per second. It struck the ironwood stump with a deafening thwack, shattering the dense wood, punching straight through the obstruction, and carrying its lethal kinetic energy right into the shadow hiding behind it. Lying in the dirt waiting to spring his brilliant trap, Jack Rollins never even saw the flash. His vest shrieked. It was a loud, continuous, thoroughly humiliating tone. Rollins froze. The dummy helmet slipped right off his rifle and rolled into the dust. He stared at his chest, his eyes wide in utter disbelief. He looked at the shattered stump just 3 feet in front of his face. I hadn't fallen for the bait. I had calculated his exact position and shot straight through his cover. He was dead. The entire red cell was dead. Rollins slowly pushed himself up from the dirt. He stood to his full height in the fading light of the canyon. He reached up, pressing the transmission button on his radio. "Command, this is Red Cell Actual," Rollins said. His voice was completely hollow, totally devoid of the arrogance that had filled it just that morning. "Index, the exercise is over. Red Cell is completely neutralized." In the command center, Master Chief Vance pressed the intercom button. "Copy that, Rollins. Confirmed. Who got you?" Rollins looked out across the vast, empty expanse of Black Canyon. He still couldn't see me. "Hayes," Rollins said softly. "She got us all." 20 minutes later, the extraction helicopters touched down on the canyon floor, kicking up massive clouds of dirt and debris. The candidates who had been eliminated hours ago sat in the back of the transport trucks, completely silent. They watched as Rollins and his elite team trudged out of the brush, their heads bowed, their vests still blinking with the bright red lights of simulated casualties. And then, emerging from the deep wash like an apparition rising from the earth, came me. I was covered head to toe in dust, my ghillie suit ragged and torn to shreds. I walked slowly, my muscles violently trembling from the sheer exhaustion, but my posture was perfectly straight. Slung over my shoulder was that heavy, battered Mark 13 sniper rifle. As I walked past the transport trucks, nobody laughed, and nobody cracked a joke. The exact same men who had mocked me that morning parted like the Red Sea, stepping aside to give me a very wide berth. Master Chief Vance stood by the lowered ramp of the lead helicopter. He watched my approach, his stern face completely unreadable. As I reached him, I stopped, snapping a crisp, exhausted salute. "Candidate Hayes reporting for exfil, Master Chief," I said, my voice hoarse but incredibly steady. Vance slowly returned the salute. He looked at the heavy weapon resting on my shoulder, and then he looked me directly in the eye. "Go get some water, Hayes," Vance said quietly, a faint glimmer of absolute respect shining in his hard eyes. "You earned your spot." I nodded, turning to walk up the ramp. I didn't need their applause, and I didn't need their validation. I had silenced the entire team, and in doing so, I had silenced the doubt forever. The mountain didn't care who you were, and neither did the ghost of Black Canyon. If this raw, unfiltered account of tactical grit and shattered expectations kept you completely dialed in, don't walk away from the front line just yet. Make sure to hit that like button to show your appreciation for the operators who constantly defy the odds. Share this narrative with anybody who appreciates intense, high-stakes military drama, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more adrenaline-fueled dispatches from the battlefield. Stay sharp out there, and I'll catch you in the next one.